your TA, which you know well at this point. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to come use you as my guinea pigs for my teaching style, which I'm trying to develop, as you know. And we are covering chapter 12 today, which I hope you guys have read. That will make everything easier for all of us. So we have somebody filming me to add more pressure because it's not enough. So you guys are on camera too, so you have to make yourselves look really good also. It's not just for me. So if you can't hear me, just like kind of do one of these, okay, in the back, so I know if I need to speak up. I usually don't have a problem projecting, but if you could do that, okay, people in the back, nod, yes, okay. All right, so we're gonna start by doing an activity, if that's okay. And it's going to be kind of similar to what I did last time, if y'all remember. So we are going to write stories, going back to elementary school for this one. And stories are really important, and this is kind of one of my areas that I research. So I want to kind of bring you guys into my world of research and also Dr. Mason's realm too. And kind of explore this as a method. So we can kind of start to apply some of the things that we've learned and some of the concepts that we've already become familiar with. So take out a sheet of paper and kind of start, so you'll have about 5 minutes. Hopefully I'll get to your question. I'll get to your question, let me do this first so we're all on the same page. So what we're gonna do is take 5 minutes to write a story. So you can, I don't care if it's real or if it's not, it doesn't matter to me. Use up to 3 characters for adult characters and up to 3 for children. Again, I don't care if they're related, they're not, who they are, this is totally up to you. So to give you some sort of direction, you know, maybe Thanksgiving Day. Could you just come up with a story about Thanksgiving Day with these characters? Or, obviously, we're not all celebrating American Thanksgiving. So, if, of course, we need to be inclusive cross-culturally, we have a lot of flexibility with this. Write a story, use the characters. You can choose a holiday of your preference. Halloween might be kind of, Halloween would work too. So, use your imaginations, be creative for 5 minutes. Questions? Yes.
Have to be about a holiday.
I'd like it to be about a holiday, yes. I'm not going to read these, but you will share them with other people in the class. All right, you have about 2 minutes left. just finish up, whatever thought you have in your head, and we'll move on. There doesn't really need to be an end, I realize that. Maybe some of you are stressed out because you like to finish your work, which is really good, but it doesn't matter. It's okay. Okay, so hold on to your stories. We're going to just kind of cover a couple basic concepts from the chapter. So we're going to just weave in this activity with some of the lecture, okay? Okay. What is the family? I'm going to ask you guys to participate because it makes me feel more at ease, and I think, to have that kind of conversational teaching will be a lot easier for all of us. So does anyone want to kind of give an overview of the definition from the U.S. Census Bureau, and kind of compare that to what sociologists might present the family as? Get those green books out. I see those green books. Okay, what do you think?
The Census Bureau defines family as two or more individuals related by blood, marriage, or adoption living in the same household. And then a sociologist's perspective on family would be the emotional ties to one another.
Yeah, so I'd say that that's the major difference. The census is very void of emotion. That's kind of irrelevant in the definition, but sociologists, that's obviously something important and kind of involved in, if you think about our sociological paradigms, like symbolic interactionists, for instance. So we're interested in the meaning, and emotion is a huge part of the meaning that we have, as a family structure. So, good job. And they're at The Simpsons, if you guys are too young to know who The Simpsons are. Okay. So just an overview of some of the different types of families. So extended family, this is kind of broadening that nuclear family structure, right? Widen that lens out. So we're going to include 3 generations out and usually living in near proximity or under the same household. So now things are getting more complicated, as we start to look at different facets of families. We're moving away from that census definition. So keep that in mind as we keep talking about all of these intricacies of families. Kin. So relatives or other relations, usually those related by common descent. So maybe family that you would come across at a reunion, but you don't really know him that well. Maybe you've heard of Uncle Joey, but this is the first time you met him. So he would be kin. Okay, look at those cleavers. Do you guys know Leave It to Beaver? You don't? Okay, I see some head nods. All right. So this is Leave It to Beaver. He's just such a rascal. Little Beaver. He's got his older brother, mom, always dressed to impress, perfect hair, and dad is, look at him, so wise in that pressed suit, that pressed shirt he's got on, looking real smart. So this is kind of what I think is a typical nuclear-looking family. So the book defines it as this heterosexual couple with 1 or 2 children living in a single household. I like to think of the nuclear family as kind of like when you buy a new picture frame, and you see like that perfect family in there, and then you put your family picture in it, and you're like, oh, maybe I should have left the one in there like it came with. I have a friend who just like redecorated her house, and she still has all of those pictures still in them. Like, maybe we should try to do something about that. But that might be a good way to remember it. It's the picture frame family. But, that's obviously not inclusive of the different types of families that we're seeing now. Okay, so let's just review briefly the different paradigms that we like to kind of relate back to throughout the course. So here's the 3 major ones that we're going to look at today. Structural functionalism. Can someone just kind of, you can read that if you want, but can somebody kind of summarize what a structural functionalist might think about families, their perspective on families? Okay.
For structural functionalism, family is like the first level of interactions with people, so they have to operate social interactions.
Yeah, socialization is a huge function in our society, right? So saying that those are the first people that you're really interacting with and that you're getting guidance from, and they're teaching you the right way to do things, and they're maintaining that structure that serves a function in society. Good job. Okay, so we have an example of a case study. Regulates sexuality and forms the basis for family with all this other functions. So, I mean, you can look at it from sexuality, gender, however, as we all know, you can look at things in really different ways. So, this is one example. All right, conflict theory. You guys know so much about conflict theory after I read all of your reflections. There's a lot of conflict theorists in this classroom. Pretty cool. What do they think about families? Yeah.
It's not necessarily to like produce structure. It's more to produce like constraints. So like families are a way to pass down like the constraints that were set like for us before.
Cool, yeah, so I wish I would have had that on a cartoon. I had this really, I'll post it for you guys. But yeah, so there's inequalities that are passed down through generations. So generational poverty is a perfect example. And I wish I had the cartoon, and you will love it, so I'm gonna send it up. So here's an example that they came up with. Marriage as a civil right is extended only to heterosexual couples in most states and nations. This is both a cause and consequence of homophobia in society. So that's going back to that emphasis on inequalities, right? Symbolic interactionists. What do you think? I see it's like halfway up, and I'm gonna go for it.
Symbolic interactions in the sense that families are united. Like if they're a ball that help each other, they're like a ball against the whole society where they all help each other and they try to develop each other in terms of leadership, in terms of connections. So a symbol of unity and conviction in all.
Well, I like that symbol of unity. That's really good. I'm gonna steal it. I'll cite you though on it.
I believe on that.
So yeah, that's a really good way to put it. So, you know, family is this social construction that we're taking part in creating. So the term parent has meaning, the term child has meaning, and the way that we interact with each other allows us to define ourselves in that sense. Does that make sense? Okay, so marriage is not solely made by completing a legal contract, but is also constructed through the accretion, that's a strange word to me, of everyday interactions between partners over the years. So again, the definition means nothing if you don't have interaction. Okay. Do you guys have any questions about theory? Theory is like kind of really confusing, so we can talk about it. That's okay. Or you can email me secretly and we can talk about it too. Okay, so let's get back to our story. So I'd like you guys to take 10 minutes to meet in groups of 4 or 5, whoever you like, just whoever's near you, and really think about, so like what we just covered, you can use the perspective, the sociological perspective, and the concepts from the book, not only the ones that we just covered. I just wanted to give you guys kind of a foundation of the text to keep in mind when we're moving forward to look at our data that we just made. So get in small groups, think about the terms and the concepts from the book and how they apply to these stories. Does it sound crazy? So this is what we're gonna do. So get together, look at your stories, see who are those characters. Who are the characters in the stories? What are they doing? What meanings are they creating through their interactions? I'm a symbolic interactionist. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. So this is my perspective, but if you'd like to apply any other perspective, please do it. If you'd like to do conflict perspective, if that's what you're seeing in the data, go for it. I wanna hear what you guys think. And this is kind of like, you did the ad deconstruction before. So use some of those skills, those analytical skills to think about these stories and the meanings that they carry. We're storytelling creatures. Everybody tells stories. And they mean something. So this is what we're going to look at. And so when you look at the newspaper tomorrow, you're going to think, oh wow, Carly wasn't totally crazy. There are a lot of things going on in these stories that aren't just there on the surface, but they're right below the surface. Stories do stuff. Okay, go for it. 10 minutes. And I'll walk around and help you guys.
Y'all go. My story is pretty much after Thanksgiving party. And we threw a party in honor I was only given
What are you guys doing? Does this make sense? Okay, cool. This is the only question I need to I really want you to get into like the cultural underlines of the kind of stories that we tell. So yeah, like what are those characters, how do they interact, and what do you think about it? We'll go over it all together too, because I want to see what you guys have. I like once I went and
Endogamy is when you example, there is your father's friend and the other kind have to marry is someone from his family. So that's the endogamy. The exogamy is when you're like not allowed to marry the people who you know or members of your extended family or your clan. So you kind of marry
Yeah.
outside.
So I think that that's a really cool point, is arranged marriage. So that would fall into, that internal endogamy, who you can marry as part of a certain group of people, right? And exogamy is X, so that's outside of that, your own group of people. So this could be referring to race, ethnicity, class, education, religion, nationality. So what do you think is more common, endogamy or exogamy?
In US, it's not.
Do you think so? Exogamy? Who agrees? No, I don't agree. What do you think?
I'd say it's more endogamy than anything.
Yeah, so endogamy does tend to be more common. We still, we have these constraints that allow us to meet people of similar backgrounds typically. So if we think of institutions, so religion, education, background, families, all of these things have an impact on who we meet and therefore who we marry, right? Makes sense? And even though exogamy, the second one, X, is becoming more acceptable, it's still less common. So it is definitely, more common than, say, in the 50s in America, but still not as common. Okay. So some more diversity of families. Another really hard word to say. So anti-miscegenation laws, I practice that a lot. And so this was, the prohibition of interracial marriage, cohabitation, or sexual interaction. So I got this clip from an old movie that you guys definitely don't know, that I'd like to share with you.
Walmart grocery has really helped my budget. You can buy brand name products or you can buy great value products. The quality of the food is great. I buy all my produce there, my apples, my bananas. It's just really a great thing for my family.
They're very fertile.
He's so calm and sure of everything. He doesn't have any tensions in him. He knows what he believes and what he thinks is right and why and where he's going. Oh, Mom, there's one thing I must tell you. He was married before and he had a son, and it was so tragic. Both his wife and his son were killed in a train accident in Belgium 8 years ago. And John, I haven't even told you his name. Mom, it's John Wade Prentice. Isn't that a lovely name?
John Wade.
Joanna Prentice I'll be. But Mom, there's something else that I must tell you that John's been concerned about, very deeply concerned. He's been worrying for the past week whether you and Dad would be upset if...
Well, it's about time. I was wondering where you'd been.
Mom, this is John.
Dr. Prentice, I'm so pleased to meet you.
I'm pleased to meet you, Mrs. Drayton. I take it Joanna's already busted out with the big news.
Well, she has told me a good deal, and all very quickly, too.
Oh, she's only known me for 10 days, so she can't tell you when I'm blushing. That could be another problem of hers. Mrs. Drayton, I'm medically qualified, so I hope you wouldn't think it presumptuous if I say you ought to sit down before you fall down, I mean.
He thinks you're gonna faint because he's a Negro.
Think I'm going to faint?
You are.
but I'll sit down anyway.
Okay, so this is just an example, right? So this is, I know, it's kind of hard to believe, right? But, so this is a movie from '67. So we're talking about these anti-miscegenation laws that were, through the '60s. So this was shortly after, in '67. So this was a pretty groundbreaking film to come out. And it's called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. So it kind of highlights, some of those interactions that were taking place around this time of when you have policies saying that this isn't allowed, and then, how those interactions on an individual level are influenced by an institution, and how those impact each other. So that's great, something that we're trying to keep in mind throughout the course is the individual level and then the institutional level. So I think that this highlights how people are interacting within those constraints. And I thought this is a good example of storytelling too. So when the daughter is talking about her fiance, did you guys pick up on, of course race is very blatant. Did you guys pick up on any of the other cultural underlyings of maybe marriage, or expectations? What do you think?
I guess her mom was expecting a man that's never been married before, that should have kids.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah, I thought the same thing. So when I watched it, I was like, oh yeah, mom's not happy. He's been married before, but there was a tragic event which led him to separate. So that would be okay, right? That's kind of one of those cultural understandings that, sure, maybe if he had been divorced, it's different than being, separated from your spouse by death.
She talks about taking her husband's last name, which
Yeah.
would have been really expected back then.
Absolutely, that's without a question, absolutely. That's a cultural understanding. Good job. What do you think?
Also, the girl was describing him, that he's well soft-spoken, he's have good courage and whatnot, so she's like, okay.
Yeah, if you are gonna marry someone and your family hasn't met them, you gotta convince them that this is gonna be a good match, obviously this is a well-to-do, as they see middle upper class, maybe upper class family, and here she comes, rolling in, and they've never met the guy she's gonna marry. She's known him for 10 days. So yeah, that's huge. So maybe you can understand why mom was about to faint, and then, she had an expectation of what this person was gonna be like, and of course, we all saw her reaction. So there's a lot going on in there. Oh, and did you guys notice how the family was tragically killed in Belgium? He's a doctor who is well-traveled, and that's pretty important too. That all kind of ties into his identity and the meaning behind that interaction. Okay, let's cover some other terms to keep in mind. Monogamy versus polygamy. I think these are pretty basic. We all kind of understand. So monogamy, you're in a relationship with one other person. Polygamy, sister wives. I was going to pull a sister wives clip, but I didn't really understand what I was looking for. I've never seen the show. It's kind of crazy. So I was overwhelmed by YouTube, which happens. So I do not have a sister wives clip, but that would be an example of polygamy. So can anyone tell me what the two types of polygamy are, though? So you have the polygyny versus the polyandry. Okay, yeah.
Polygyny is when one man has multiple wives, poly meaning many, gyne meaning female, and polyandry is the opposite, one woman, multiple husbands.
Awesome. Nailed it. So, I love that you use the gyne, because okay, gynecologist, that makes sense, but I'm not, that's not my realm, so I didn't even think about that, but that's really cool because I love ways to remember terms. So the one I came up with was thinking about Ginny. So Jenny is kind of, a woman's name, and Andy. If you marry multiple, that's kind of like Andy and Jenny. So to kind of distinguish the two, that was my trick. Could not work for you, and that's okay. Okay, so let's revisit our stories that we came up with. Try to relate them a little bit to the chapter. So do you guys, I mean, what's your overall impression? Was it easy to come up with this story? Was it hard? Any consensus? Who thought it was easy? Okay. Who thought it was hard? Okay. So I think more people thought that it was easy, and that makes sense because we're storytelling creatures, right? We express a lot of meaning, whether it be blatant or symbolic, through the way we speak to each other, which is often through stories. You can see stories told from the floor of Congress to help, pass a bill, or you're talking to your friend later tonight about this wacky class, this wacky teacher who came in. So, and they all do certain things. So you're trying to convey a certain meaning, you're trying to elicit a certain emotion by telling these stories. When you look at newspapers, that's, the author of the story is also important, as well as the audience. So you're thinking about all of these different interactions through stories. So this is a technique that I practice called narrative analysis. So it's pretty fun. You get to look at stories that people tell and pick out the characters, are there victims, are there heroes, villains? Did I say that? No, I didn't. So you can look at who the people are and how they're interacting. Is there a plot to the story? And what are the underlying cultural meanings? So that's kind of what we were practicing together today. So let's just kind of throw some stuff out there. What sociological concepts did you, well, pause. Did you guys mostly write about families? Who wrote about a family? Raise your hand. Okay. I want to know what the other people wrote about. Because, so I said, write about 3 adults, 3 kids. I didn't really necessarily say that had to be about families. But it seems that most people went that direction. Thanksgiving is a very family-oriented holiday. The holidays tend to be very family-oriented. What were you going to say?
I wrote about a man with a dog.
A man with a dog. All right. What were they doing?
He was gonna save this little boy's Thanksgiving with his family because they weren't gonna be able to they weren't gonna be able to pay for it.
Aww. So there are families in that story, though.
But then the little boy lied. It was actually the Halloween.
Ah.
So
So there's some intricacies in the story. So he was a hero, or the guy was going to be a hero to save the boy who needed help, and the family was in need, right? That was a needy family because they didn't have enough for Thanksgiving. That's horrible.
Yeah.
But then it turned out to be some wacky, Halloween trick. It was a trick. But that goes to show, so you have this man who's going to save this family who can't eat. I mean, that's a cultural understanding of everybody should have a meal on Thanksgiving, right? It would be really sad if a family couldn't have a meal on Thanksgiving. So that's what you're tapping into there. Okay, what other sociological concepts did you guys identify when you're going through, or just some ideas? They can be related to the chapter, so anything. Okay.
I was saying how who brought what to the event or whatever, because instead of family can do the event and brings what, and the guy with the men are mostly responsible for the feedings and stuff, whereas the females are more responsible for the sauce of the side dishes and stuff.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great example. So we'll get into that, a little bit too, to review with our chapter. But kind of that division of labor within families. So the men grill the meats because, meat is masculine. And then you have, the women who are in the kitchen making all the side dishes, and how the extended family comes together and everyone will bring a dish. And those are cultural understandings of coming together for Thanksgiving. And then those gender roles, sorting out the division of labor within the family. That's great.
I guess in a way I sort of wrote about how people are often judged by how they look, because I wrote about a costume contest in Halloween.
Cool. So, could you give me a little bit more? What happened in the costume contest?
3 friends went as the 3 blind mice, but they got beat out by a girl in a sexy cat costume, but she didn't actually look like a cat, just sexy.
Okay, so there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on there. So that goes into relationships and families, right? So we can say that I heard this story the other day about parents letting their having constraints on what their daughters wear on Halloween, right? Because now on Halloween it's like, since Mean Girls, you gotta wear some form of lingerie with animal ears. So that's become this norm, right? Everyone, all the people dress like this. So, I'm a mom of a 2-year-old girl, so I was like, oh, I'll read this article. And there's a debate of, what you can do to kind of encourage them to be an individual without, not infringing on their self-expression and kind of walking that fine line. But scary stuff, being a parent, yeah. Okay, we'll go up to you.
I read about a little Native American boy who he discovered the Pilgrims were there, and he went and observed them, and he was fascinated by how different they were from him. So it was just kind of
Okay, so what sociological concept is that, you think?
I don't know, at first he was shocked to see that there were people who were different, because he'd never seen anybody besides his family members and stuff. So he was shocked that they were they had lighter skin than him, and they dressed different, and they held they had different kinds of things that they held. So
cool. So very outsider, right?
Yeah.
Outsider thing. So socialize with one group, and then absolute culture shock, right? If you come across another group that you're unfamiliar with, I think that's great. Okay. Yes.
We were talking about some of the ritualistic natures of some of these holidays and celebrations, like maybe birthdays or Christmas, and how these rituals kind of create the bonds for families and kind of tie them together. I was actually talking about a woman giving birth during Christmas.
Oh.
And yeah, kind of related to the Christ story.
Yes.
And
Wow.
I thought that even at birth, the whole family comes together and sees the baby, and everyone's there, and they all hold the baby, and that's all to build on that whole bond that the family has.
Wow, I think that's really, really cool. So did you guys all hear that there's this almost like a mirroring going on? You tied it into religion. So you have these different institutions that are really complementary, right? Religion is helping drive families and vice versa. Really cool. What else did you guys think? Yeah.
So one thing that almost tired all of our stories and relates a little bit to small interactions is basically that the kids are the people who who are the most lively in the families, are the people who just jump around. Sometimes they're the most troubling, like in her story she said the kids just make a mess or trouble the whole family. And for example, in her story she said she didn't like some kind of food at her home, so she changed it, so they all changed it because she didn't like it. And so it's all basically the family sometimes moves towards what children go with, but at the same time not to the extreme intense.
I think that's a really interesting point, because we're talking about the fluidity of family dynamics and structure. So in agrarian societies, you have kids who are working, and I mean that's obviously there's been since then as well. But you have kids who are put to work. They're working for the greater good of the family. Whereas now, is it like that? What if I sent my kid out, my 2-year-old, to help me, plant the seeds on my farm, or I straight up sent her to work? Yeah, it's not a norm. So now, I mean, just like your story was saying, we treat kids much differently. We coddle them. So there's been this shift, in recent years where, and there's research to kind of figure out, is this a good thing, is it a bad thing? How are the kids, how is raising the children this way really affecting them as adults? And it's interesting stuff. Okay, so what were some of the things that were not in the stories? Anything that you were like, huh, that we kind of read in the chapter that wasn't there? Were all these stories pretty happy? No? Most of them? Did any of them include any family problems?
There's usually celebrations signify that it's a time where everyone bonds, and especially when there's conflict in that kind of sense, that means there's an issue with the family and it's not the norm. Everyone really tries to avoid the problems and conflicts, even if they don't like each other. They try to make it, oh, it's a celebration, it's a holiday. Let's just work together for now.
Sure. So it makes sense, you know, if you didn't have a story about, you know, drunk Uncle Albert coming in and, you know, knocking over the turkey or the ham, and then, you know, spousal abuse going on. I mean, these aren't things that people want to happen on the holidays. There's a cultural understanding that you don't really want to tell those stories, right? I mean, some stories will lock you up if you tell certain stories. You know, we're going to talk about some social problems, so be aware that, you know, we're constructing meaning by telling these types of stories, and what's not in the stories is oftentimes just as important as what's in them. So just food for thought to keep in mind as we move forward. Okay. Let's move on and we can revisit this. How about that? All right. So doing work of the family, we were kind of talking about this, right? This was definitely a theme that came out, at least in the stories that you guys were telling, about who does what type of work. So who has any chime in? What do you guys think about the division of labor in families? Yes?
Like the dad would usually mow the lawn and the mom does the dishes.
Good. So what, did you guys hear that? Mom does dishes, dad mows the lawn. Okay.
All the stereotypes.
Stereotypes and norms. So these are things that we think, but these are also things that are kind of true, right? I mean, who mows the lawn? So these are instrumental tasks that we're talking about, right? Instrumental tasks would be mowing the lawn, doing the dishes, whereas more expressive tasks, what would be an example of an expressive task? Yes?
Like normally you'll go to your mom for advice, whereas your dad just don't
Sure.
give advice, right?
Sure, maybe mom gives better advice, and again, this is not blanket, this is not a blanket statement, but these are trends that there are expectations for mom to be more empathetic or understanding to their daughter having a hard time, right? Those are some understandings and norms in our society. What do you think?
All right, a couple of statements. One, first of all, I've noticed that usually in the know-how or stereotypes or whatever people want to say about them is that basically how people see it is that guys usually work outside, girls usually work inside. I don't agree with this, but that's what people see. And another thing is that that's what you were going off of. Basically, if boys have problems, sometimes they go to their father because boys and boys, guys and guys. Or if the guy's not there, they go to their mom because they know they have an intimate relationship.
Yeah, so it depends, right? Depends on the context and what you're trying to get out of the conversation, or the dynamics that exist are always different in families.
I think it's also kind of the same, but like the instrumental tasks, where if there's a certain scenario in the family where like a father is physically unable to like mow the yard, like usually a child or someone that is old enough they will take their place and or if someone is sick in the family, they will fill those slots so that the family is like still functional and get
in families and what their roles are, and when is it okay for them to start filling in for things like that? You know, it's very subjective. Yes.
I think that it's pretty common, or at least in my house, it was very common that, like, the kids would do more of the instrumental tasks, just so that way, like, cause I know my mom just always wanted to teach me responsibility and, like, self-sufficiency, so, like, she, very young, I was on my hands and knees cleaning the toilet, like, I learned, and now I could live on my own if I wanted to, and be perfectly fine, so I think it definitely depends on, like, who the family is, but I've seen it common that, you know, parents will give their kids chores, which are usually instrumental tasks.
What is that an example of? Giving kids chores? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're socializing, these kids, right? I mean, now you know how to live on your own, as you said, and that's huge, and that's, you know, structural functionalist would say, you know, that is how our society can progress with families, and that keeps the order and maintains it.
There's more responsibility.
Yeah, responsibilities. Okay. All right, so we talked about this. Men and women have always performed different roles to ensure the survival of their families. These roles were not always considered unequal, though. So if you think about the Industrial Revolution, that is when wages came into the picture. So now you have a woman sitting at home taking care of a family, and that's lesser than work because there is no monetary reward that goes along with that. So that is, of course, tying into the economic structure that conflict theory, maybe you could say, would create some inequalities in gender in that sense. Okay, so now, women. Nowadays, we get 2 jobs. So, paid labor outside the home and unpaid labor inside the home. And Arlie Hochschild, you can hear it different ways. Arlie, my old friend Arlie, is the woman behind Second Shift. So this concept of unpaid labor inside the home that's often expected of women after they get home from work, after working a long day, they still have those expectations to take care of the child. And this type of research was done to, you know, demonstrate that, working with lots of families, that's really still how it is, you know. Maybe we're moving toward, I hope, more equality in the home for men and women for child care duties, but typically it does still, the emphasis is on the women in the home. And I have a funny personal story to tell you guys, because as you know, I have a 2-year-old. So my toddler was almost gonna be here today, actually, because her daycare, down the street, they had a transformer explode outside, so they had no power. And this morning they were saying, you know, the power's off, but we're still open, you know, they're hoping to get it back on. And they called me right after we met to kind of discuss my presentation, and they said, you gotta come get Violet, my daughter. Gotta come get your kids, because it's 85 degrees in here and they're all, you know, it's hot. And even though it should not be hot at this time of year, should it? No. So I'm freaking out. I'm like borderline in tears because, you know, this is a big deal to me. Maybe it doesn't, you know, it's a big deal to me. So I wanted to do a great job and prepare, and I was really relying on that time to do that. So here I am having this dilemma of, you know, and this is just so common with people who are working and trying to take care of their kids too. It's really a role conflict, right? So I'm a mom, but I also work full-time, more than full-time, and I almost had to bring my kid here today to come do my job. And it's pretty common, you know. It's definitely, it's a conflict, it's an internal conflict. And I have a lot of extra literature on that, if any of you are interested.
Plus, I want to see from your perspective, how is it when, for example, a mom or whatever the case is a teacher, but also he or she's teaching his or her son or her daughter?
Oh yeah, I can never.
How does that work? Does it,
cross those boundaries? What do you think?
I don't, like, I've never experienced it, but I have, like, a personal story with that, because my mom used to substitute teach, and she would never substitute my class.
Oh.
Because she, she didn't want to,
Show favoritism.
right, she didn't show favoritism.
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe not at 2 years old, right? Like, I can't really, okay, I don't know, maybe I probably would show favoritism to my own kid, right, at any age. But I think that I would think be more acceptable to care for your child if you worked at, say, a daycare as opposed to at a university and teaching your child as a student, I think is something kind of unethical there. Yes.
Well, my mom's a teacher, so she actually had to end up teaching my sister one year, and she's kind of she's a stickler, so she like had no sympathy for my sister like whatsoever. So we used to get like referrals in school, and she had to end up giving my sister one because she just didn't take her seriously. And my mom was like, I'm not gonna treat you any better than anybody else.
No, she's not down with nepotism.
But yeah, so I mean, she definitely didn't show favoritism, obviously. So.
Wow.
I went to elementary and middle school with maybe 3 or 4 kids whose parents at one point or another were either teachers, substitute teachers, and one kid, his mom was the school nurse at my elementary school for a number of years running. And all of those seemed to work out okay, even when the kids would have their parents as teachers, because we're talking about like 8-year-olds. So there's not much you can do to show a whole lot of favoritism to an 8-year-old in an elementary school classroom besides provide them a little bit of extra homework help.
Yeah, so this is an interesting kind of debate that you started because it's kind of like those lines of, institution are blur oftentimes, don't they? And I think that that's really something to take away from the point that you're making. Yes?
My other one I had my father work at the same high school I went to, and I eventually had him as a teacher. And when I had him as a teacher, I thought I got more work and I got in more trouble than anyone else in that class.
That might not be a good thing.
Because he had expectations of me, and then he had expectations of the class.
Yes.
And then you have me walking on campus, and then you do something on campus, it get back to him eventually.
Yeah, that can be kind of scary, huh? Okay, you're up first.
Just going home always worked in the same elementary school that I went to. So she was friends with my teachers, and like my teachers would come over to my house and hang out with my mom. So I felt like they were like more my friend than my teacher when I was younger. So it was like weird to like have them be like authoritative to me. This is like my bad.
Yeah, the power relations aren't clear, and I think that can be problematic at times. I can imagine that. Okay, we're gonna have to move on. All right, I just want to cover some more things about relationships. So, who wants to kind of just summarize what the difference is between these two terms here? Yes. That's why I didn't say it. I wanted you to say it.
Okay. It's kind of like dating someone or being with someone that has like similar interests as you, and the other one is like in the same area as you.
Yeah.
Like living in the same area and living.
Exactly. Okay. So, and then, what about? So I have this question up here. So, with all these advances in technology, how do you think that might influence mate selection? Yes.
Even on dating websites, you can see how far away a person is from you, and you can set certain filters for how close another individual is to you. So even though we can now connect with people across the world, there's still a preference for most people to be romantically involved with someone who you can see on a day-to-day basis in person.
Yeah. Exactly. So even though we now have the option to kind of widen the spectrum of relationships and who we decide to date or marry, it's still more typical to have more of that, of the same, right? Same and nearness. Yeah.
So an example for what you said would be like Tinder, and for miles, and then like say how active, like how many hours or minutes ago they were active, and like how far away they were.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm not on Tinder, but I'm history. All right, we're gonna have to move a little, I'm sorry, I'm gonna scoot through a little bit, but when we don't finish, we'll carry on, and we, you know, we'll post the slides too, so try to write everything down. I go a little quickly. Okay, so family in the life course, we kind of talked about this a little bit, how there's been this shift for the way that we treat children and families. So here's another kind of overview of, obviously the children's experiences depend on different factors that are listed here, and those in turn impact the parents, as you would presume, I think. Okay. Life expectancy is increasing. Awesome, right? I mean, you guys are gonna go in, some of you are going into the medical field, so this is definitely something that you're gonna have to keep in mind, you know, as you progress throughout your studies and your careers. The elderly population. So 10% of elderly live below the poverty line. I'd say that that's a problem. That's a pretty significant percentage that are not being cared for. And now it's not so much a norm as it used to be to care for elderly family members. So as you can see, over 40% of senior citizens will spend time in a nursing home as opposed to being raised by their own children or kin. Okay. Some trouble in families, which was not in the stories, I don't think. No, it wasn't. Okay, so domestic violence, it's by far the most commonly form of family violence, okay? It includes behaviors where there's an abuser who's maintaining a power over the abused, right? So here's different forms of abuse that you guys should be familiar with that were covered in the chapter. Physical, verbal, financial, so cut off totally. Sexual, yes, that happens with married couples, absolutely. And psychological, all of these things. Okay, so how do people stay in abusive relationships? This is something that, you know, it's a big question, it's a serious question. So these are the stages. The relationship seems normal at first, and then, you know, things start to kind of get that power dynamic, and the victim describes it as sort of walking on eggshells, right? So this leads into this third stage of some back and forth, right? There's some abuse going on in the third stage. And stage 4 is, I'm so sorry, it's not going to happen again. The abused doesn't want it to happen again. So there's a belief that it won't, that it's going to get better. And so this can be a cyclical problem. The fourth phase is often called the honeymoon phase. So it's, you know, interesting because the honeymoon is typically at the beginning of a relationship. So this is the stage 4. So that kind of is demonstrating that cycle, right? Revisiting the beginning of the relationship in hopes that it will get better. Okay. Rates of domestic violence, they're about equal across racial and ethnic groups, sexual orientation, and religious groups. This is what your text says, so you can revisit this as well. And people are more likely to be killed by family members, attacked by family members, people you know. You know, we think about this kind of stuff happening in a dark alley, or, you know, you're out late at night and you get jumped, but yeah, it's definitely more common to happen in this realm. And this, of course, is a huge social problem. Child abuse, abuse of the elderly, and these are underreported. So if you get into researching this type of social problem, abuse, know that these are all underreported for various reasons. When you think about storytelling, for instance, children are often viewed as unreliable voices, as well as the elderly. You know, we'll say, oh, they're senile. They don't know what they're talking about, or they're just a kid. They don't know what they're talking about. So it would make sense that those types of voices that are often stifled aren't typically reported, right? Or they're socialized to think that it's not acceptable to report against somebody. neglect, also something that we covered, and there may or may not be intent to neglect. So if you don't have adequate funds, I guess you could argue that you would be neglecting, but there's not an intent to actually harm the child. So splitting hairs. Either way, it is a problem. Incest. Do you guys, you're familiar, of course. So kind of revisiting some of the things that we covered before with deviance. Would you classify incest as a taboo Folkways or Moray? What? Who says taboo? Yes. Dr. Mason raised her hand, so you should have all raised your hand. Yes, that's right. Of course, that's, I mean, absolute disgust, horror. You can't even talk about it. Nobody wrote a story on incest, did they? No surprise. Okay, so I'm gonna hold up for a sec. I'm going to post divorce breakups and some of the trends. There's only about 5 slides we didn't get to, but I just want to reiterate the activity that we did and the meaning making that goes on in storytelling and how it's important. So these types of stories, they're told everywhere. So when you start hearing them, listen a little bit closely than you might have before, and you can really put on your sociological imagination to try to understand those underlying concepts. So families, race, class, gender, sexualities, things are embedded in these types of stories, and they definitely do stuff. There's power in those stories. On the Senate floor, like we said, in courtrooms, sometimes stories speak a lot louder than statistics, and that's really what I wanted to get at with you guys, is even though it's not a traditional form of data analysis, it's certainly useful and it's really important. Presidential speeches are really cool to look at. I'm starting a project on looking at the stories of social service, so adoption and foster care, and the stories that they tell about the families and the children that they serve, and how that impacts the way that our culture understands what it means to be an adoptive parent, which I argue is really problematic because it sets this like glamorized expectation of, wow, this is gonna be so fun and cool. Then you're like, oh my God, this kid is really challenging, and I did not expect that. So there's this disconnect that's going on, and that's just one of my ideas. I wanted to get to the data to show you guys, but there's just so much to cover. So thanks for being a good audience, and